This afternoon we're going to quickly speak about 2 units, but I'm not really going to speak about it a lot because a lot of it is really coming from a theoretical background on what is the detailed specification and all of that. So you'll see the 2 modules is firstly developing a detailed use case specification, and then the next module talks about the use case writing tips. So some tips on how to write them, how to structure it properly and nicely. But for this, there are also a nice big walkthrough on developing the detailed use case specification. Now you'll see it's taking you through how to structure the communication, how to properly write this. So last week we briefly looked at the use case specification and working with that. But in this case we're looking at expanding that what we've worked with in a bit more detail. So for example, over here we have the brief description, use case, participating actors, the flow of events. So a lot of it will be an expansion of what we previously had. So you'll see now they're talking about developing it and what are we looking at when we're writing this. We need to look at sentences where we're using an active voice, where we clearly say the user selects to start the use case, or the user selected to authenticate. So from that you can clearly see who selected to start the use case and then what is he doing. So when we are looking at our communication and we're looking at how to write the communication, we can start to see that they're talking about a round-trip communication. It's almost like the actor selected to do something. What is now going to do? What's now going to happen? The system is going to do something backwards. The system is going to do something, it's going to fetch information and display it to the user. So that's why what we're seeing, we're looking at round-trip communication. The actor sends a message to the system. The system sends a message backwards to the actor. We're seeing the total interaction there. If you go to an elevator, and you stand out, you inside the elevator now, you selected a floor to which you want to go. What is going to happen next? You've pressed the button. What's the system going to do? It's going to close the doors. And then it's going to start to move, either up or down, depending on your floor which you've selected. Okay, so the system will then do something based on what you've done. So there is some section about describing the basic flow and then possibly alternative flows. Guys, what is a basic flow? What is a basic flow? If we just draw a line there and we say it starts at some point and it finishes at some point, what can we see from there? We have some form of a start and we have a finish or end condition. What would make up a basic flow? Not really. It won't be an initial node and final node, just that. Basic flow is the flow of things which will happen 90% or 99% of the time. That is the thing which you are designing this use case for. If you are selecting a floor inside an elevator, what should happen? If the use case is like select a floor, if the use case is like select a floor, what are you doing? You're selecting a floor and the elevator is taking you there. What should happen 99% of the time? You should be able to get into the elevator, press the button, you've selected the floor where you are going, and it takes you there. Simple as that. But what is an alternative flow? Do we have an alternative flow for it? What happens if the elevator breaks? You stuck inside. What then? This is just the basic flow where we just see this. But we can also have an alternative flow which does not really have a result in a successful finish of the use case. You being stuck. You can't reach the end or your desired flow. But what we also can have is we can have alternative flows which come back and it jumps back to your basic flow. Okay. It can even be to such extent that our alternative flow at one point breaks up and it results into a failure. Okay. So that alternative flow can either go back into the basic flow or it can go into a failure of its own. Now when we write a detailed specification, if we look at this use case selected flow, it is really an expansion of the outline use case specification. What do we have here? We already have the description, the actors, flow event statement is there. We have the bulleted outline specification, which comes from there. But if we now need to write a detailed specification, what would tell us the detail there? If the first bullet is saying illuminate floor button, who's illuminating the floor button? Is the user illuminating the floor button? Did he bring his torch with which he's doing it? Or how's it happening? Guys, you've been in an elevator, am I right? Yeah. If you press that button, what happens? Who makes the light go orange? So what are we going to say there? Who's doing this? The system. Something like that. The system illuminates the selected floor button. Does it tell us who's doing this? Yes. Does it tell us what is he doing? Yes. What happens next? Add floor to queue. Who's doing that? Is it the user who's now adding this floor to the queue? Where's the queue? Can the user get to the queue? So who's doing that? Again, it's a system. So what are we seeing here? The system Something like that. Is it clear? Can we understand what is going to happen in that step? Did I add detail in there? Yes, we've added enough, sufficient detail to say, but who is doing this? What are they doing? To clearly see from the interaction what is going on. Okay. So we can continue going on with all of this to add in more and more and to expand each of these steps. So if the doors closes, who's closing the doors? So the system closes the doors. So now I'm just going to jump a bit down. What happens in our alternative flow? The door's not closed was one of the options of our alternative flows. What happened there? Remember, this is our basic flow. This guy here at the top is our basic flow. That is going to happen when it's all nice and successful. The sunny day condition almost went. But now something went wrong in this portion where the doors must close. So what am I going to say here? Okay, but first, before we write that, we need to say, how am I going to get to this alternative flow? If in step 3 point what? Which step did our error occur? Three. So if in step 3.1.3.1, where we initially attempted to close the doors, the system attempted to close the door but was unsuccessful. What should happen now? What are we going to see? What is happening? So this is similar to saying, but we are now in this portion. We were in a basic flow. Some condition happened, and we are now jumping out into one of our branches. Okay, so when we are here, if in step 3.1.3.1, the system attempted to close the door but was unsuccessful, what must now happen? Should the system keep on checking? Should the doors just stay open? Say again? It must keep on checking. So the system will keep on checking if it's safe to close the elevator door, and then once the doorway has been closed, what happens? Does the use case just stop there, or what? Where are we going back to? the use case continues in so once the doors has been closed, the use case continues in step 3.1.4. What have we seen from this? We saw, firstly, what is the condition that starts this alternative flow? And yes, it was on some step in the basic flow. We can see if in this step on the basic flow, the following happened. What must then happen? We had some expansion on what must happen. But then we also have a statement that tells us, okay, if all of the previously mentioned things is correct, where are we going back? From this, I'm seeing, once the doors has been closed, the use case continues in a specific step. So I can also go and say, in step 3.1.4, of the basic flow. Okay. Because as we go on, we can now go and start to expand all of the alternative flows, the rest of the use case. Any questions to what we've done so far? Is it clear? Okay, that makes good. So when we go through this, we can now also start to see, but we can start to identify and just review our scenarios to see, but is it still correct? Did I possibly make changes in my alternative flow which needs to be reflected in there? Okay. For example, yeah, we also have a few interesting scenarios, the communication error. Basic flow, and then there's a communication error. And the precondition to this use case is saying the system must be on and functioning properly. And then the post condition, the elevators move to the selected floor and the door has been safely opened. Okay. Okay, so when we go through this, we can start to expand our use case, our initial outline use case specification, into adding more detail to clearly say, but what is just happening in each of these outlines, each of these headings? Okay. Any questions? If we quickly had to go to another use case, I have another use case here. This comes from a banking system, an ATM example. And this guy is now attempting to authenticate into the bank. He's busy inserting his card. What is the system doing? The system is now attempting to read the account information, then display the account selection. So then the user can select the account which he would like to authenticate for. Then it displays the PIN screen where the user then enters his PIN and the system validates his PIN as correct. So if we quickly had to expand this, what is going to happen in there? Who is doing this? Okay, so the system is doing what? Who can tell us what would you write here? What should the system do? The system should read from where? Is it going to go to the banking system, or is it going to read the card? What is it going to read? So something like that. The system reads the account information from the customer's bank card. Then what is happening? it displays the account selection. What happens there, guys? Who's doing this? The system display the system displays a listing of customer accounts to the customer. So what is going to happen there? Account selected. Who's doing this? Is it still the system? Who's doing this now? So the customer, what is he doing? He selects an account against which he wants to be authenticated. Something like that. The customer, I missed some. Select an account which he wants to be authenticated. Okay. Then the system is going to display the PIN screen, and the PIN will be correct. The system attempts that. So you'll see there's also option here for the PIN is empty. Checking that. So the system checks it. When will the system check that and realize but the PIN is empty? Yeah, in step 3.1.6, it says to us that the PIN is correct. Here the PIN was entered, and now the PIN is correct. So in that step, if in step 3.1.6.1 of the basic flow, the system detects that the PIN is incorrect, it's wrong. Yes.
Isn't the system supposed to, like, only supposed to put in the PIN before the system can display the accounts that are available in the car before we enter the PIN?
For example, no. What you are talking about is this. Here where it says the account selection, account selected. What is happening just before this? Display account selection. What happens there? I know the banks do it a bit differently. Each of them has a bit different opinion and different interpretation of it. I know that my bank goes and says, but when you put in your card, it gives you your language selection, and then it asks you against which account do you want to be authenticated. Because I know that I have multiple accounts with them, so I can use multiple accounts to be authenticated. So yeah, we are just talking about that. It's just giving you a list of your accounts, and then you select the account which you would like to now enter your PIN for. Is your bank doing it differently?
Yeah.
So they do it differently. What do they do?
Before I select the account, I must enter the PIN for the card, not for a certain account. Yeah.
So you must first enter the PIN for a specific,
For the card.
for the card.
Then
Okay. You see what I mean? There's different interpretations and variations on it. And even when we develop a specification like this, what happens, you take it to a client and they will say to you, but we view it a bit differently. Now, at least when you develop it like this, you can take it very quickly to them and say, this is what I think your system should be doing. Because a lot of times there's a discussion between you and a client going on about what is the system going to do, how is it going to work, operate, and all that. And you can then take that to them and say, but okay, this is what I understand from what you are telling me from your business. Okay. Guys, then lastly, before we go, you will see there's a few things from the use case writing tips where it just mentions to you how to better write a use case specification. Now, things that can help us in that is that we can, for example, have and use a glossary to capture specific words. If we are talking about the customer's bank card, what does it mean? So we can use a glossary as a starting point of our discussion to say, but if we talk about the bank card, this is what it means, and that everybody on this team really understand it as the same thing. So it helps us to prevent misunderstandings from there on. Okay. So that we can even get to a place that when we develop our user interface, if we talk about customer details, and we just mentioned that in our specification document, what am I really talking about? I can then go to my glossary and see from there, but that is what I'm talking about. The details talks about his name, his address, his city, his full address about it. Okay. We can look at later on with it as a domain model that describes the tables related to this. But those things which we'll get to. Words which we might need to leave out in our detailed specification is, for example, words which links it to actions that talk about our user interface. For example, click, open, button. Because this already talks about what interface is this person using to do certain things. When you go to an elevator, are you going to click? Okay, so we need to start to almost limit ourselves from using specific words, because that talks about already the implementation environment which you might be using. So words which we might rather use is like prompt, initiates, submits, starts, informs, chooses, specifies, selects, displays. Those are words which is nice and can a lot easier say to us what are we rather doing. Okay. So then there's even mention about how do we handle actors' choices in the flows and what should be done from that. There's a mention there. Also, what can we do with repetitive flows? What is repetitive flows? Behavior which is repeated. So if your behavior is very complex, it can be added into our subflows. Okay. You'll see we talked about subflows at one point. We looked at the specification, and there, for now, we still have subflows as empty. But a subflow, in essence, when we look at it on our diagram, it's almost like saying, it's a flow of logic which is very complex, that needs some calculations before you can continue from there on, or might just be long. And that can be also a flow which is repeated over and over. So you might add it as a flow on its own. Okay. So guys, lastly, there's also a few questions, review questions at the end of this, which you can just review. Any questions from this? You okay? Okay. Guys, enjoy your afternoon.